The cold wind cut through the empty streets as a man wrapped himself tighter in his tattered coat, shivering under the flickering streetlight. His name was Daniel Carter, a man who once had dreams, a home, a family. Now he had nothing but a small cardboard sign, a worn-out blanket, and a pocket full of coins he had begged for throughout the day. Life had been cruel, beating him down with every misfortune imaginable. But tonight, something was about to change. But before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe because what you're about to witness will leave you speechless. Daniel sat outside a 24-hour convenience store, his back against the wall, watching people pass by without sparing him a glance. His stomach growled, a painful reminder that he hadn't eaten all day. He had just enough coins to buy a small meal, but as he stared through the glass window at the bright yellow lottery sign flashing inside, a thought struck him. What if, just this once, luck smiled upon him? He had never believed in miracles, not after the way life had treated him. But something about tonight felt different. Maybe it was the way the wind whispered in his ears, or the way the neon lights flickered as if calling out to him. With a deep breath, he stood up, clutching his small collection of coins, and stepped inside the store. The cashier barely looked at him, his eyes trained on the security camera, probably making sure Daniel wasn't trying to steal anything. Ignoring the silent judgment, Daniel approached the counter and pointed at the lottery tickets behind the glass. "One ticket, please," he said, his voice hoarse from days of barely speaking. The cashier raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. He tore off a ticket, slid it across the counter, and waited for Daniel to place his money down. As Daniel handed over his last few coins, he couldn't help but wonder if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Walking back outside, he settled onto the cold pavement, staring at the ticket in his hand. His fingers traced the numbers, his heart pounding. He knew the odds millions to one. People played their whole lives without winning. What chance did a homeless man have? But then again, what did he have to lose? Hours passed, and the city around him grew quieter. The once busy streets emptied, leaving only the occasional hum of a passing car. Daniel pulled his blanket tighter around him, using a small flashlight he had found in the trash to check the numbers on the ticket against the ones being announced on an old, discarded radio a few feet away. The first number matched. His heart skipped a beat. The second number matched. His breathing grew uneven. The third, the fourth, the fifth. By the time he reached the final number, his hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped the ticket. He checked again, and again, and again. Every single number matched. For a moment, Daniel sat in stunned silence. His mind couldn't process what had just happened. He turned to the nearest stranger, a man waiting at a bus stop, and shoved the ticket toward him. "Can you check this?" Daniel's voice cracked. "Please, just tell me I'm not crazy." The man took out his phone, pulled up the official lottery website, and punched in the numbers. His eyes widened. He checked again, then again. "You," the man's voice trembled. "You just won the jackpot." Daniel felt the world tilt beneath him. The ground no longer felt solid. The weight of years of suffering, of hunger, of being invisible. Suddenly, all of it cracked like glass. He wasn't just a homeless man anymore. He was a winner, a millionaire. His hands tightened around the ticket, his breath coming in short gasps. People at the bus stop started to notice the commotion, their eyes shifting toward the crumpled man in rags holding onto a piece of paper like it was the most precious thing in the world. Some laughed, shaking their heads, assuming he was just another delusional beggar. But then the man with the phone turned to the growing crowd and shouted 3 words that sent shockwaves through the night. "He's telling the truth." In an instant, the entire atmosphere shifted. Whispers turned into gasps. Gasps turned into shouts. And before Daniel even had time to process what was happening, he found himself surrounded by people, all staring at him as if he had just walked out of a fairy tale. But fairy tales weren't real. And this was only the beginning. Daniel sat frozen on the cold pavement, his grip tightening around the crumpled lottery ticket. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on him like an avalanche. His entire life had been nothing but hardship, a never-ending fight for survival. And now, in a single moment, everything had changed. The crowd around him had grown, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Some people pulled out their phones, recording the disheveled man who had just won millions. Others scoffed, convinced it had to be a mistake. "Are you sure?" Daniel asked the man with the phone, his voice barely a whisper. The man nodded frantically. "It's real. You just won $125 million. Daniel's breath hitched, his vision blurred. The sounds around him, honking cars, chattering strangers, the hum of the city, faded into the background. For so long, he had been invisible, a forgotten man, and now all eyes were on him. "Someone call the lottery office," a woman in the crowd said. "He needs to verify it," another person added. "He needs security. Someone could try to steal that ticket." That thought sent a jolt of fear through Daniel. His hands trembled as he tucked the ticket into his coat pocket, pressing it close to his chest as if it were his lifeline. Because, in a way, it was. Before he could even decide what to do next, flashing red and blue lights lit up the street. A police car pulled up, and 2 officers stepped out, pushing through the crowd. "All right, what's going on here?" one of them asked, scanning the scene. His eyes landed on Daniel. "Sir, are you okay?" Daniel wasn't sure how to answer. Was he okay? He had just gone from having nothing to suddenly holding the key to a new life. His heart pounded in his chest. "He just won the lottery," someone shouted. "Like the lottery." The officers exchanged glances. One of them took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Sir, do you have the ticket?" Daniel hesitated before nodding. "It's in my pocket." "All right," the officer said calmly. "Let's get you somewhere safe." Safe. The word sounded foreign to Daniel. He hadn't felt safe in years. The officers led him away from the crowd, guiding him toward their patrol car. Cameras flashed. People shouted. Some even cheered. It all felt surreal. Once inside the car, the officer driving turned to him. "We're taking you to the state lottery office. They'll verify your ticket and they'll walk you through the process. But first, do you have any identification?" Daniel swallowed hard. I don't." The officer frowned but nodded. "All right, we'll figure that out when we get there." The drive through the city felt like a dream. Skyscrapers loomed above, glowing with artificial lights, but Daniel barely noticed. His fingers stayed pressed against his pocket, making sure the ticket was still there. His golden ticket. A part of him wondered if this was a cruel joke. Maybe he'd wake up on the cold pavement, ticketless, still just another forgotten man. But the car pulled up to a sleek, glass-walled building, the state lottery headquarters. And the reality of it all hit him like a tidal wave. As soon as he stepped out, he was met with flashing cameras. News reporters, journalists, people were already talking about him. The homeless man who won the lottery. The officers guided him through the entrance, where a receptionist looked up in shock. You're the jackpot winner?" Daniel nodded. "I think so." A security guard stepped forward. "Let's verify that ticket." Daniel's heart pounded as he pulled the ticket from his pocket and handed it over. The security guard placed it inside a machine, and the room fell silent. The machine beeped once, then twice. A green light flashed. The guard turned to Daniel with wide eyes. "Sir, congratulations. You're officially a multimillionaire." The words echoed in Daniel's mind. Multimillionaire. He had spent years digging through trash for food, sleeping on sidewalks, begging for loose change. And now he was richer than he could have ever imagined. But what came next was something no one could have predicted. The lottery official shook Daniel's hand firmly, but Daniel barely felt it. His mind was spinning. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't a mistake. He had won $125 million. But what now? "Mr. Carter," the official said, snapping Daniel back to reality. "There's a process to claiming your winnings. We'll need to verify your identity and set up a plan for your payout." Daniel hesitated. "I don't have an ID. I lost everything years ago." The official exchanged a look with one of his colleagues before nodding. That's not uncommon in cases like yours. We can work with the state to verify your identity through other means. Another employee spoke up. You'll also have the option of receiving your winnings in a lump sum or as annual payments over the next 30 years. Daniel had never even thought about things like this. He had spent the last few years just trying to survive one day at a time, and now people were asking him to plan for decades. He glanced down at his ragged coat, his dirt-streaked hands. He still felt like the same man who had been ignored on the streets just hours ago. But he wasn't. He was worth more money than he had ever dreamed of. "Do I have to decide right now?" he asked. The official smiled. "Not at all. We'll set you up with a financial advisor who can help you figure out the best option." A financial advisor? Daniel had never even spoken to one of those before. "Before we continue, we strongly recommend getting legal representation," another official added. "When someone wins this much money, things can get complicated." Daniel frowned. Complicated how? The man hesitated. "There's media attention, financial predators, people from your past who might come forward, sometimes even threats. It's important to protect yourself." Daniel's stomach twisted. He hadn't thought about any of that. He had been so focused on escaping poverty that he hadn't considered the dangers of sudden wealth. As if on cue, the receptionist's phone rang. She answered, then looked up with wide eyes. There's already a crowd gathering outside." Daniel's heart pounded. "The news has spread," she continued. "The press is here, and there are people claiming to know him." Daniel stiffened. He hadn't spoken to anyone from his old life in years. Who could possibly be looking for him now? One of the officials turned to the security team. "Let's move him to a secure room." Daniel was quickly ushered into a sleek, private office. A large window overlooked the city skyline, and for the first time in years, he wasn't outside looking in. He sank into the leather chair, his mind racing. This was supposed to be a dream come true. But why did he feel like a hunted man? A knock on the door made him jump. A woman in a business suit entered, offering a warm smile. "Mr. Carter, I'm Melanie Harris. I specialize in high-profile lottery winners." Daniel eyed her warily. "You knew I'd win?" She chuckled. "No, but cases like yours attract attention fast. My job is to help you navigate this transition." "Transition?" Daniel repeated. That word felt too small for what was happening. She sat across from him. "I need to be honest with you. Right now, you're in a very vulnerable position. Your face is already in the news. People will come forward. Some will want to help. Others won't." Daniel swallowed. He had spent years being invisible. Now the whole world knew his name. Melanie continued. "I strongly advise against making any public statements yet. No interviews, no sudden big purchases, nothing that will make you a bigger target." Daniel nodded slowly. "And what about the people outside? The ones saying they know me?" Her expression tightened. "I'd be very cautious. We can go through each case carefully, but first, let's secure your money and identity." He ran a hand through his unkempt hair. This was overwhelming. Just yesterday he had nothing. Now he had money, lawyers, advisors, and possibly danger. He took a deep breath. "Okay, what's the first step?" Melanie smiled. "First, let's get you somewhere safe. After that, we'll start building your new life." Daniel exhaled. His new life. He had no idea that before the night was over, everything would take an even darker turn. Daniel sat in the back of a black SUV, staring out at the flashing cameras and the growing crowd outside the lottery office. The city that had ignored him for years now couldn't stop watching. Melanie sat beside him, her voice calm but firm. "We're taking you to a secure location. You'll need time to adjust before making any public moves." Daniel nodded absently, still clutching the inside of his coat where the winning ticket had once been. It was safely locked away now, but he still felt the need to protect it. The car pulled away, maneuvering through the city streets. Daniel didn't know where they were going, and honestly, he didn't care. His thoughts were elsewhere. The people outside the lottery office, who were they? Old friends? Strangers hoping to get close to money? Someone dangerous? He had spent years being invisible. Now his face was everywhere. Melanie scrolled through her phone. You're already trending online. Some people are celebrating your win, but... She hesitated. Daniel glanced at her. But what? She sighed and turned the screen toward him. A news headline flashed across it. Homeless lottery winner. A heartwarming story or a potential disaster? Daniel's stomach tightened. Beneath the headline, people were commenting about him. He's just gonna waste it. Watch him blow it all in a year. Why does he get to win when hardworking people struggle? He'll be back on the streets in no time. Daniel looked away, his jaw tightening. They didn't even know him. Melanie's voice softened. This is why we need a plan. You have to decide what kind of life you want now. And more importantly, how to protect it. The car pulled into an underground garage beneath a luxury high-rise. Security guards were already waiting. As soon as Daniel stepped out, the guards flanked him, guiding him into the private elevator. The doors slid shut, and for the first time that day, everything was quiet. Daniel exhaled, his hands still shaking. This morning, he had woken up on a sidewalk. Now he was in an elevator leading to a penthouse suite. The doors opened to a breathtaking view of the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek modern furniture. A bedroom bigger than any shelter he'd ever slept in. Melanie set her bag down. This is temporary, just until we set up your new residence. Daniel ran a hand over the smooth countertop. He felt like an intruder, like at any moment, someone would realize he didn't belong here and kick him back to the streets. Melanie continued. I've arranged for new clothes, legal assistance, and a financial planner. But first, we need to talk about the people who came looking for you. Daniel turned. You found out who they are? She nodded. Two claim to be distant relatives. One says she's your ex-girlfriend. And another... She hesitated. He says he's an old friend from before you lost everything. Daniel's pulse quickened. He hadn't spoken to anyone from his past in years. Do you want to meet any of them? Melanie asked carefully. Daniel hesitated. Part of him wanted to know who had suddenly reappeared. But another part of him knew the truth. They were here because of the money. Before he could answer, his phone, his new phone, given to him only hours ago, started buzzing. A number he didn't recognize. Then another. And another. People are finding your contact information already? Melanie said, grabbing the phone and silencing it. This is why we need to act fast. Daniel rubbed his temples. This was too much. Too fast. He had thought winning the lottery would bring him peace. But instead, it had made him a target. Melanie's voice was gentle but firm. Daniel, you have to decide. Do you want to face your past? Or focus on your future? Daniel exhaled, his chest tight. He had no idea that before the night was over, he would be forced to make that decision, in the most shocking way possible. Daniel stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling window, staring at the city lights below. Just 2 days ago, he had been sleeping in an alley, invisible to the world. Now, his face was everywhere. News reports, social media, and even phone calls from people he hadn't heard from in years. And then there was the letter. It had arrived at the penthouse an hour ago. No return address, just his name on the front. Inside, a single note was written in bold, shaky handwriting. You don't deserve this money. Enjoy it while you can. Daniel's hands clenched around the paper. Was it a threat? A warning? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. He turned as Melanie stepped inside, her expression unreadable. We ran a background check on the people claiming to know you, she said, holding a folder. Do you want to hear what we found? Daniel hesitated, then nodded. She flipped open the folder. The two claiming to be relatives? No proof of relation. Likely scammers. Daniel had figured as much. The woman who said she was your ex-girlfriend? Melanie continued. She was 5 years ago, but she's been arrested twice for fraud. Daniel exhaled sharply. Of course. And the last one? He asked. The guy who said he was an old friend? Melanie's face softened. His name is Marcus Wells. He's actually telling the truth. Daniel's breath caught. Marcus. They had grown up together, best friends. But when Daniel lost everything, he had pushed everyone away. Marcus had tried to help, but Daniel had been too ashamed to accept it. Melanie hesitated. Marcus is waiting downstairs. He says he just wants to talk. Daniel's pulse quickened. If there was one person he would trust from his past, it was Marcus. Send him up, he said. A few minutes later, the door opened, and there he was, Marcus. Older, sharper, but still the same guy Daniel had once considered a brother. They stared at each other for a long moment before Marcus finally spoke. You really did it, man. He shook his head, grinning. I saw your face on the news, and I thought, no way, that's Daniel. Daniel chuckled. I barely believe it myself. Marcus stepped forward. I tried to find you, man, for years, but you just disappeared. Daniel swallowed hard. I didn't want anyone to see me like that. Marcus nodded, understanding. Then his expression grew serious. Look, I didn't come here for money. I just wanted to see you. Make sure you're really okay. Daniel searched his face for any sign of greed, but there was none, just genuine concern. For the first time in days, Daniel felt like someone saw him, not just his money. But before he could respond, his phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. He ignored it. Then the power cut out. The entire penthouse went dark. The only light came from the city skyline outside. Marcus tensed. That normal? Daniel shook his head. No. Melanie's voice came from down the hall. Security is checking it out. But then the emergency lights flickered on. The TV screen flashed to life on its own. A distorted voice came through the speakers. Your money doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the city you abandoned. Daniel's blood ran cold. Marcus took a step toward him. What the hell is going on? Daniel could barely breathe. Someone somewhere was watching him, tracking his every move. And they weren't done yet.